Hello, you are on the Epic Life Stories channel. Today we will listen to a new exciting story. Subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. One gray autumn evening, police officer Jonathan Moore was patrolling a lonely, abandoned part of the city. It was an area that had long since lost its former identity, and in the thick darkness of the streets, his company car only added to the atmosphere of hopelessness. He stopped at a garbage container, where a strange noise was coming from. There was no soul around, only the hum of leaves and the crunch of broken bottles under the wheels of his car. As Jonathan approached, he saw something small and black among the piles of rubbish. In the light of the lantern he could make out the outline of a baby wrapped in a dirty blanket. The baby looked scared and hungry, but alive. Too alive for such a place. Jonathan quickly called for medical help and investigators, and the baby was taken to the hospital. Jonathan himself could not shake off the feeling of anxiety, as if something was wrong. Years later, Jonathan forgot about this incident. He often told his friends about how he had to face this horror, but none of them could understand why this incident left such a mark on his soul. The baby was adopted by a kind family, and his life took its course, like Jonathan's life. But one day, when Jonathan was approaching retirement, his life again intersected with that incident. He received a letter from the boy's former adoptive parent, who was now a teenager. The letter said that the boy began to have terrible nightmares, and he developed strange abilities that no one could explain. The letter also spoke of strange incidents that had accompanied him since birth. At first Jonathan thought it was just a coincidence or a desire to attract attention, but he soon discovered that the boy began to search for information about his origin. One day he came to Jonathan looking for answers. They met in an old abandoned cafe, where the boy told the story of his nightmares. Jonathan was shocked to hear that these nightmares were full of shadows and terrible creatures, and that the boy saw scenes that seemed familiar to him, but he could not understand where they came from. Slowly, Jonathan began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. The boy spoke of things that could not be known except through a deep connection with some hidden evil. The story he heard was scary and ridiculous, but Jonathan knew something was wrong. He decided to conduct his own investigation to understand why this boy and his family were in this situation. While Jonathan was studying documents and records that could explain the boy's origins, he came across old reports of missing persons and murders that were associated with rituals and sacrifices. This made him think that perhaps his own intervention in the baby's fate could be part of a much more sinister scheme. However, he could not even imagine that he would soon discover a truth that would turn all his ideas about the world and what was hiding in the shadow of his own fears. Jonathan continued to delve into his research, scrolling through notes and documents that could shed light on the mysteries surrounding the boy. In his search, he discovered a strange coincidence: several cases of disappearances and violent crimes associated with the same area where he found the baby coincided with the dates when sacrifices took place in ancient rituals. These rituals were associated with cults that worshipped ancient powers who promised to bestow their dark powers on those who could offer something of value in exchange. He began to connect this data with facts about the boy, and the more he learned, the more strange and sinister his search became. He learned that the boy's parents, who disappeared shortly after his adoption, were actually victims of these cults. Their names were mentioned in old records as participants in rituals that at first glance appeared to be ritual sacrifices. Soon Jonathan came across the name of one of the main participants in these rituals, a once famous sorcerer in the city, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances many years ago. Interestingly, this man was associated with many cases of disappearances and abuses that Jonathan knew about, but always thought were just rumors. Now he saw that there was a real threat behind these rumors. Diving deeper into the sorcerer's history, Jonathan discovered that he was dealing with ancient forces that could influence people's lives, and that the boy could be part of some ancient curse or rites. His scattered notes and records of rituals contained information that such rituals were aimed at transmitting black magic from one person to another. This would explain the strange abilities and nightmares that haunted the teenager. Jonathan decided to meet with the boy, now a young man, to discuss his findings. He was worried and felt that his own investigation could put them both in danger. Meeting in a cafe where they had previously communicated, Jonathan told the young man about his discoveries and explained that his parents were not just victims, but participants in something much more sinister. The young man, who listened with alarm to Jonathan, spoke about his recent oddities, about visions that became more and more vivid and frightening, about the feeling that he was being pursued by something dark. He was sure that what he saw was not just nightmares, but something real and dangerous. Jonathan finally realized that they weren't just haunted by horror, but that their own lives could be part of a larger, more sinister game. Meanwhile, Jonathan discovered that one of the people he had been in contact with might be connected to dark forces. These forces apparently wanted to return the young man to his true destiny. As Jonathan and the young man began to more actively seek solutions, they noticed that events around them began to develop in a dangerous direction. Strange occurrences and mysterious figures began to appear in their lives. Every day the threat became more real. The cult began to actively act to return the young man and complete their ancient rituals. Jonathan and the young man knew they could trust no one and must act quickly to uncover the true meaning of the curse and find a way to protect themselves. But before they could formulate a plan to counter this threat, it became clear that time was against them. Something dark and powerful, lurking in the shadows of their own fears, was about to enter the final phase of its game. Jonathan and the young man, realizing that their actions could decide the outcome of the entire situation, prepared for the last and most dangerous step, revealing secrets that could change their lives forever. And so, their path became full of dark omens and terrible discoveries. As they got closer to uncovering the true source of the evil that held the boy in its chains, they began to realize that some truths might be too terrible to accept. Jonathan and a young man named Adam decided to look for answers in the abandoned archives and ancient libraries of the city. They hoped to find some additional clues or ancient texts that could explain what was happening. The library they chose was known for its collection of ancient manuscripts and occult texts that might shed light on ancient rituals and dark forces. When they entered the abandoned premises, they noticed that the air was heavy and ominous. The shelves were covered with a thick layer of dust, and silence reigned everywhere. One of the books they found was covered with strange marks and images. Jonathan and Adam studied it carefully and soon realized that it was an ancient text associated with dark cults and rituals. With each leaf they turned, they discovered more and more eerie details, rituals that required blood and sacrifices, ancient deities that demanded sacrifices from their followers. At the center of all these rituals was a cult known for its evil deeds, and a description of a being that lived in the shadows and fed on fear and pain. Adam, continuing to read, came across a page that described a special ritual, a ritual that allows you to transfer powers and curses from one person to another. This ritual required that a victim be chosen and brought into the ritual to become the new bearer of power. With each new ritual, the curse became stronger and darker. It turned out that the boy Jonathan found was the chosen host. It was intended to become a link between the world of the living and the world of shadows. The ritual was performed when he was found in the trash, and his life was carefully hidden from prying eyes to protect him from those who wanted to turn him back to evil. Knowing this, Jonathan and Adam knew they had to find a way to stop the ritual and free Adam from the curse. They knew they had to find the last remaining member of the cult to prevent the ritual from being completed and the final transfer of power. They found out that this participant was the same person Jonathan had interacted with earlier, a person who was actively interfering with their investigation and following their steps. But while they were preparing for this decisive step, Adam began to experience increasingly vivid and frightening visions. Vague shadows appeared in his dreams, growing into full reality, and he felt his connection with the world of shadows becoming stronger. He knew that if they didn't find a way to stop the cultists, his condition could become irreversible. Finally, Jonathan and Adam found the location of the last member of the cult, an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city. This place was full of darkness and mystery, and they knew that they would face the darkest forces. When they entered the mansion, they found many ancient symbols and signs indicating the completion of the ritual. In the center of the hall there was a large altar surrounded by candles and ancient books. The last member of the cult, a dark sorcerer, was preparing for the final rite. Jonathan and Adam entered the hall, and the sorcerer turned to them with an ominous smile. He was sure that he was already close to completing his plan. The smell of candles and ancient incense hung in the air, creating an atmosphere in which every movement seemed to slow down. The battle for Adam's life had begun, and Jonathan knew that their every action could be decisive. Stopping the ritual was not as easy as they thought. The sorcerer used his powers to create protective barriers and repel their attacks, and Adam, increasingly drawn into dark visions, felt that his powers and destiny were under threat. And when it all seemed that it was too late, Jonathan remembered an ancient ritual that could destroy the connection between the world of shadows and Adam. He knew that to do this they needed to find and use a special artifact mentioned in the book that could break the curse. This artifact was in an ancient storage facility under the mansion. Time was running out, and their confrontation with the cultist escalated. Jonathan and Adam knew that they must do everything possible to find the artifact and save Adam before the dark forces finally took over. Jonathan and Adam, pursued by the shadow of the sorcerer, rushed down the dark and confusing corridors of the ancient mansion. There was a feeling within them that they were moving not just through physical space, but also through a labyrinth of darkness that tried to confuse and stop them. They descended into the dungeon, where the air was cold and damp, and the walls were covered with moss and mold. Jonathan turned on his flashlight to light the way and noticed that in one corner of the corridor there was an ancient door, covered with iron brackets and covered with ancient symbols. This door likely leads to the vault they were looking for. They managed to open the lock, and the door opened with difficulty, creaking on the old hinges. Inside was a wide hall filled with ancient artifacts and books that were covered in the dust of centuries. Among them, Jonathan noticed a strange, sparkling object lying on a pedestal in the center of the room. This was the artifact they were looking for, an ancient bowl with inscriptions on it, sparkling with a mystical light. However, as soon as they approached the bowl, something unexpected happened. The air around them began to vibrate and shadowy figures began to appear in the corners of the room. The sorcerer, who seemed engrossed in his ritual preparations, was clearly not alone. His powers were already activated, and he was using them to keep them in this nightmare place. Adam, under the influence of the visions, seemed increasingly clouded and distracted. He felt that the connection with the world of shadows was becoming more and more unbearable. Jonathan knew their time was running out and they had to act quickly. He grabbed the cup and felt powerful vibrations emanating from it that simultaneously inspired hope and fear. When Jonathan and Adam returned to the hall where the ritual took place, they saw the sorcerer inscribe complex symbols on the floor and complete his preparations. He was already ready to bind Adam with the forces of darkness forever. Jonathan, holding the cup in his hands, felt it fill with light that fought the darkness around them. He began to cast spells that he found in ancient texts, hoping that they could destroy the barriers that the sorcerer had created and free Adam. Adam stood in the center of the circle, his body trembling with fear and tension, and his eyes were full of pain and fear. The sorcerer noticed them and rushed towards them angrily, but despite his efforts, Jonathan and Adam continued their action. They used the bowl to shine light on the symbols that the sorcerer had drawn, and soon noticed that they began to disappear, dissipating under the influence of the light. The darkness in the room began to dissipate, and the sorcerer began to lose his power. He shouted furiously, using his last strength to stop them, but every time he tried to interrupt the ritual, the light of the cup only became brighter, reflecting his dark forces and destroying them. When almost all the symbols were destroyed, the sorcerer seemed to have finally lost his power. Tension hung in the air as Jonathan and Adam continued to concentrate to complete the ritual. However, at the last minute, when it seemed that they had almost won, something unexpected happened. The shadows in the room began to gather together, forming a huge and ominous creature that broke out of its hidden prison. It was far more powerful than they could have imagined, and its energy was focused on destroying their efforts. Jonathan and Adam, already exhausted and almost exhausted, realized that their fight was not over yet. Now they had to find a way to not only deal with the remaining forces of darkness, but also destroy this new, more dangerous evil before it could completely take over the world. Adam, despite his weakness, began to use his remaining strength to fight the creature. Jonathan turned to the artifact again to find another clue that could help them in this final and decisive battle. It became clear that this battle would not only be for the salvation of Adam, but also for the fate of the entire world, and only joint efforts could save them from final death. As Jonathan and Adam recovered, they couldn't help but feel like their lives had changed forever. The battle they entered into left a deep mark on them, but also gave new meaning to their existence. Adam, who was still struggling with inner demons, decided that his trials had not been in vain. He became actively involved in the study of occult practices and magic, seeking to use his abilities to prevent similar threats in the future. He contacted several groups of researchers and defenders who specialized in dark forces and entities, and began to study with them. Jonathan, a longtime police officer, understood that his role in this case was part of a much bigger picture. He left his job as a police officer and decided to devote himself to studying and fighting dark forces. He began working with Adam, creating a support and advocacy group for people facing similar threats. They developed plans to prevent and investigate cases involving occult practices and evil forces. Meanwhile, they continued to keep in touch with others who had experienced similar situations. Jonathan and Adam were involved in creating a network that provided assistance to victims and researched ancient texts to better understand the nature of the evil they faced. They also worked to strengthen connections with researchers and historians to gather information about similar cases around the world. Even though they had done much to prevent future threats, Jonathan and Adam knew that the real battle never ended. They continued to be vigilant and ready for new challenges that could arise at any time. One day, several months later, Adam received a strange letter with no return address. The letter spoke of new signs of dark forces that began to appear in another part of the country. This letter contained information about an ancient cult that was apparently looking for a way to bring back to life the very being they had once fought. Adam and Jonathan, realizing that they could not stay away, decided to go on a new investigation. They knew the mission ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but they were also confident in their determination and readiness. They understood that the fight against darkness is a continuous process, and they were ready to defend the world from those who would try to disturb its peace. Together they set off, leaving behind the old mansion and the city that had witnessed a great battle for them. But a new challenge awaited them, which would require all their knowledge, courage and determination. They were ready for this, knowing that every step they took brought them closer to their goal, protecting the world from dark forces that never completely retreat. And so, their journey continued, filled with new challenges and discoveries that would determine their future battles and victories. The story of Jonathan and Adam, their sacrifices and their heroism, has become a symbol of the endless struggle for light and truth, opposing the dark forces that know no rest. This is the end of this wonderful story. I hope you liked it, and you were imbued with this atmosphere. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as it promotes my video. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye everyone.